Welcome, everybody, to this episode of The Monthly Blend, a monthly video podcast brought to you by Next, powered by Shulman Rogers and the CONNECTpreneur community. I'm Tian Wong, founder and host of the Big Idea CONNECTpreneur community, and we're a global community of over 25,000 investors, founders, and business leaders from around the world. I'm also CEO of Opus 8, which helps companies and alternative investment managers raise money through our network of over 4,000 accredited private investors, angels, and family offices throughout the United States. Along with my co-host, Anthony Millen, who's the founder and chair of Next, powered by Shulman Rogers, we are pleased to bring you this monthly video podcast, which covers trends, information, and interesting research and tidbits, as well as fascinating interviews with game changers and newsmakers here in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore Metroplex. Anthony and I started this podcast about 2 years ago as a way to increase awareness of cool, innovative happenings in our region, to break down silos, and to serve as a mechanism to do our part in helping to bring the region together and help foster innovation and entrepreneurship here. Today, we're absolutely thrilled to have a conversation with two of the nation's top thought leaders in the area of artificial intelligence for health and medicine. And I'd love to have our guests introduce themselves. I'll give Moira and Tom the opportunity. Why don't we start with Moira? Moira, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm Dr. Moira Shika. I'm a radiologist, I'm a physician, and I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Kavizny. We're doing for physicians what Google Maps does for drivers, and I'll explain that more during our conversation.
Terrific. Welcome, Moira. Next, we have Tom Laurie, who's Managing Director of Second Century Tech. Tom, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me on the program. So as you mentioned, I'm Managing Director of Second Century Tech, which is an advisory firm for health and medical leaders trying to bring AI into their clinical and operational workflows. I kind of refer to myself as a recovering Microsoft exec, where I'm the former National Director of Artificial Intelligence for Health and Life Sciences at Microsoft. I'm also an author. My latest book, Hacking Healthcare, has been an Amazon bestseller, and it focuses specifically on the use and the challenges of AI and bringing that into health and medicine worldwide.
That's terrific, Tom. We're looking forward to hearing more from you and Moira. And now I'd like to turn things over to my co-host, Anthony Millen, who's a serial entrepreneur. He's a venture capitalist with the National Venture Capital Fund and also one of the nation's leading startup attorneys. Anthony is founder and chair of Next, powered by Shulman Rogers. Designed from an entrepreneur's perspective, Next is disrupting the way the legal services are being delivered with an innovative new model for providing expert legal services for startup and emerging growth companies at predictable and reasonable cost via fixed price packages and service bundles. Last year, Next was selected by Law.com and Legal Week as Startup Emerging Growth Law Firm of the Year, beating out several huge and very well-known law firms. And in addition, earlier this year, Next was also a finalist for the Legal Times Award as the most innovative law firm in the country. Anthony, congratulations and take it away.
Great. Well, thank you, Tien, and thank you so much, Moira and Tom. Very excited for today's program. And we're going to be spending time really talking about the application of AI to health and medicine, which is such a critically important topic to be covering. So where I would like to start is we seeing in a lot of trade journals the expression of concern about the use of AI in health and medicine. Many people suggesting that maybe we should slow down, some people suggesting an all-out moratorium on its use. And as leaders in the field, would be very interested to hear your thoughts on this narrative and the impact a narrative like this is having. And maybe, Tom, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, that's a very great and a very broad question. We can spend the entire time probably just on that. But no, quickly, I mean, AI has been around for a long time. We've seen just in the last year the emergence of things like ChatGPT, which I always like to point out is one of many flavors of what's known as large language models, which is really driving the change that everyone's talking about. So some of the challenge today is less about what the technology can do and more about, frankly, the velocity of change that's coming at everyone as a result of things like these large language models. So do we have some catch up to do when it comes to putting guardrails around some of what is emerging? And can be used in health and medicine, really anywhere? And the answer is yes. The challenge, though, is when I hear people talking about slowing progress down, the first thing is, well, can you really do that? So I think everyone knows there was a global petition going around a few months ago, signed by some very prominent people, suggesting there'd be a 6-month moratorium on development of large language models. And when asked about that by another press source, my response was, saying we're going to have a moratorium on progress and development is kind of like me saying I'm going to put a petition out to say tomorrow we're going to suspend gravity. So the real issue is less the progress that's going to happen. I'd rather change the narrative to say, how do we speed up the conversations, the education of regulators, legislatures, and everyone else who really need to understand and put the appropriate guardrails in place quickly rather than slowing things down to match the speed of how that normally goes.
You referenced, Tom, and maybe we can just, for some people who aren't as familiar with the terms, when you talk about large language models, just to give a very high 30-second or minute overview, just to give people some context to what you mean by that.
Yes, and I'm sorry if at any point in this program I'm starting to geek out, please pull me back. But I bring this up because when you look at a year ago, if I had said ChatGPT or GPT or large language models, no one would know what I'm talking about. And today, you know about it. Your mom knows about it. Your kids not only know about it, they're using it to change the way they do their homework. So things like GPT is a version of what's known as large language models. A large language model is something where we've essentially mapped all possibilities for all language, all words, all syntax, and we're able to then mine that and use it to start developing intelligent things such as mining for text documents, being able to look for not only information within a massive body of knowledge, but actually have that then construct something like a theme paper, an initial presumption of a diagnosis, which is not to say it should or can replace the human, but it's one more thing that allows us to take great advantage of all of the knowledge and information and the explosive growth of that knowledge coming at all of us.
Perfect. Thank you. That's really helpful. Moira, in terms of seeing what, trade journals talking about slowing down and moratoriums, from the perspective of the medical community as a leader in AI and a physician, how is that narrative playing out from the medical community and peers of yours that you are talking to and interacting with?
No, thank you. That's a great question. And so I am a physician, I'm a radiologist, and I've been on this long innovation journey, and I really have been educated throughout this journey from the tech side and the, amazing technologists that we're working with, but still rooted in the physician community. So I can kind of see both perspectives. And I talk to VCs who are investing in third-party groups who are going into healthcare and trying to apply AI and getting very frustrated because the physicians aren't happy with what they're seeing and are rejecting it, and they don't really understand what's going on. So I think across both parties, everybody recognizes that we have a healthcare crisis. We have massive problems. We have a problem with overwhelming amounts of data held in silos. And everyone recognizes that artificial intelligence, or AI, is a tool that we can use to solve these big problems. From the physician perspective, what we've seen so far, despite billions spent on AI medical imaging startups alone, is that we're seeing tools that aren't actually making our lives better or helping us to help our patients and produce better patient care outcomes. That the tools that we're seeing so far today are actually making our lives worse. So despite what we'll see in terms of VC-backed startups and the outcomes that they claim, the physicians aren't happy with it. So that's one facet. But the other big piece of the puzzle is that what Tom just alluded to is the right guardrails are not in place yet. So there are major patient safety issues that haven't been properly addressed. And from my perspective, we're not even measuring the things that matter most to measure as we're implementing these really powerful new technologies in healthcare. So I'll give you one specific example. So especially with medical imaging, we have enormous variety in terms of image reconstruction algorithms, right? And so when you apply these powerful classifiers, these neural networks, to try to classify different diseases, and you have data sets that are very, very diverse, these AI application tools are extremely brittle. So the ACR, American College of Radiology, did a study and found that 93% of radiologists said the AI tools were unreliable in patient care environments. It's huge. And we know why, right? Because the data is so variable. So if you look and you can watch all these, tons and tons of AI medical imaging startups funded by VCs, they're not even reporting brittle failure rates, which is dangerous, right? So there should be regulations, there should be guardrails in place that these companies are mandated to report brittle failure rates. That's a basic patient safety issue. Other metrics that are not being in today's clinical environments as a radiologist, the only thing that's being measured is the number of cases that we're reading. But when we're implementing things with AI, then we need to also be measuring patient care outcomes and all sorts of other things. So the guardrails and the metrics are not in place yet for safe implementation.
So we've kind of heard that from both of you, just in terms of not so much you can put something back in the bottle or stop progress, but more looking at the environment, like you said, the guardrails and barriers, and we'll touch on more of that in a little bit. Tom, I'd like to just get back to you. First of all, congratulations on your bestseller, Hacking Healthcare. You mentioned it in the opening, and in that book, you introduce your readers to the intelligent health revolution. And I'd like to just understand what this is and how it relates to another topic that we hear a lot about around digital transformation. If you could maybe share a little on that.
Well, absolutely. So, I introduced the whole concept of the intelligent health revolution in my last book. And essentially, the best way to define it is just for anyone listening is to say, think about what occurred when the pandemic hit, where it provided a dramatic backdrop to fast forwarding on things like digital and AI. I did a piece for Forbes a while back where they asked me to basically say, what did healthcare learn from fighting a global pandemic? And there were three things that really describe the intelligent health revolution. One, we found that an industry known for moving at glacial speed can in fact move at warp speed. Two, we found that many, not all, but many health and medical leaders were willing to take on the status quo, and they were willing and capable of driving agile transformation. Third, and finally, it's important for everyone to recognize humans fought and won the battle, but the weapon they chose to go faster and be better was AI and digital. And I go on in the article to point out how AI was used for everything from reducing cycle times to the vaccines to improving consumer experience to telehealth. So think about that. That's a good definition. And then finally, what I see emerging at this point is everyone's using AI in health and medicine. And really, there are two camps that I see emerging. One, there's what I call the traditional health model, where they're using AI to basically make the existing system more efficient. But there's a new group I'm calling the intelligent health systems. That can be a whole organization, can be a division within. But basically, they're using the same AI to essentially rethink the entire care and delivery process. So they're focused on things like how to change and make more efficient everything across all touch points, experiences, and channels. And I'd finish just by saying, when you think of all of that, let's go back to the pandemic. Look at what retail health did in pulling forward so many things where they became the epicenter of delivery of service, vaccines. They were the one-stop shop. They're a great example of how retail health is leading the way when it comes to looking at how to rethink the entire process using things like digital and AI.
It is amazing when you see, I know family members in the health space who just how rapidly things just switched overnight. For instance, in moving online, and you're talking about all of this powerful technology and capability that was available, but hadn't really been pushed through at the speed and the use cases that were suddenly forced. So I think, again, something else that we'd like to touch a little bit more on is different uses of AI in different models. And, Moira, with your company now, what is unique is you're pursuing something called decision augmentation. And you talk about a lot of companies that are working in the space that are really focusing what's more oriented around decision support. And so this is an example of a paradigm shift in using this new technology. And it would be great just to kind of understand and explain to people how you're pioneering in moving from just decision support into actual decision augmentation.
Thank you very much. So just to feed off of what Tom just said, to reiterate, so much of what we're seeing is groups that are using AI. They think they're being innovative, but they're really attaching AI onto old paradigms, right? Onto decision support, what have you. And I just want to reiterate a great comment I saw from a physician entrepreneur colleague the other day. What we really need is, like Tom said, is to think different. We need the iPhone moment for digital health, right? Everybody's kind of making everything more complex. Investors are looking for their fast return. And what we really need are the fundamental redesigns. So the switching from decision support to decision augmentation takes a fundamental redesign approach. And that's what we're doing. So how I explain this and the way I can map it, what we're doing to people, the quickest is to explain it from the perspective of Google Maps, to try to start to understand the experience of physicians in our healthcare system today, right? Which has the fastest growing rate of data of any domain. So we've got the worst data problem, the most expansive data, and we've got the worst silos of anybody, right? So imagine that you're driving in your car and you don't have Google Maps, and you're trying to make a decision about where you go, and you're having to take in every single piece of data about every single thing that's around you, right? Because you don't have Google Maps. But you do have Google Maps, which has structured data, beautifully structured data. So 80% of that data is being filtered out for you. You don't have that noise like a physician is having to deal with today. So you're driving in your car and you have metadata, and you see the metadata, key metadata. I have 3 street signs and then I make a turn. That's a decision augmentation technology, where, to contrast to decision support, right? Decision support is, I, as a physician, have to take in all the data, all the noise, put it in my head, make a decision, right? All these groups over here are taking AI, sticking on single pieces of data, generating more information and putting more burden on the physician, instead of creating the decision augmentation technology like a Google Maps that has AI making low-level decisions in the back end, right? That helps us to manage the data, that creates a technology for the user to make fast-paced, better decisions in a real-world environment. Does that make sense? So that's the paradigm switch that we're talking about. The AI is making low-level decisions, the human is making decisions, and the human is making a final decision, and that's decision augmentation, and that's the paradigm shift.
No, I think that's a great way to describe it, and one, just given the ubiquity of Google Maps and how it's changed driving, is something really exciting to look forward to with the work that you're doing.
Thank you very much.
So Tien, I'm going to hand it back to you, and we'll get into some additional questions for Moira and Tom. Thank you.
This has been great, guys. I'd like to drill down a little bit. You've talked about sort of the practicality of integrating AI into, physician and clinician practices. And no one's doubting that AI has huge potential, or that it's been used, even though it's not being used far from optimally. But if you could peer into your crystal ball, and this is for both of you, how do you guys see the incorporation of AI into practice in a way that optimizes patient outcomes? You had mentioned earlier, Moira, about, as a radiologist, I don't know, I've read that AI is definitely going to dominate your industry at some point, be able to read charts as well as the skilled and trained doctors. But do you guys envisioning this thing happening fast, slow? If you could help us sort of visualize what you think is going to be the sort of adoption curve of AI. Tom, why don't we start with you?
I'd once again jump in and say, that train's already left the station. It's happening. It's happening now. Again, the velocity of change on technological breakthroughs is almost stunning. There is a need for guardrails, for regulations to make sure it's used appropriately. But what I would say is, maybe I frame it and then I'm going to toss it to Moira, where anyone who's ever worked in AI understands it only drives value by doing one of two things, which are all part of change process. It either automates the way work is done or it augments the way work is done. Automation means jobs that are done by humans today will be done by machines. There are very few of those jobs in health and medicine today because those are typically low-value jobs, highly repetitive activities. When you look at healthcare, particularly a physician, a nurse, you have a workforce of knowledge workers. This is where augmentation comes in. AI is not going to replace the physician or clinician. Instead, properly used, value comes when we bring it in behind those knowledge workers to make them better at something they do. In almost all cases, that involves looking at how work is done now and then reimagining, which brings us back to some classic things like Lean and Six Sigma principles. So it only adds value if it changes a process, makes it better. It does that by coming in and around those frontline clinicians who, frankly, are the smartest people to know how AI should be used to develop those new use cases going forward. And it's everything from helping with diagnosis to helping truly bring a great discipline to what's known as population health.
Yes. Thank you for that, Tom. Moira.
Listening to Tom, and I'm enjoying these responses just as much as everybody else. I think nothing is going to happen or diffuse through healthcare without physician adoption. So that's a must. And just like Tom's saying, if we design these tools in a way that augment what physicians do today in a way that they're happy with it, they feel like it's a safe and effective tool for patient care, then it can diffuse at the rate of really physician education and physicians being in front of clinical studies, et cetera, right? So this is not, technology cannot diffuse through healthcare at the speed it would diffuse through, other domains for that reason. In terms of what is our, pathway to adopting these tools, I can provide you the specific roadmap that I see for our startup. And that's that you start with, like we said, we're going from decision support to decision augmentation. That's a really big deal, right? It's a paradigm shift that we've never done before, where we're going to let autonomous AI algorithms start to make low-level decisions in our healthcare environments. So that's got to start in a way where they're making decisions about, in Kabizmi's system, it'll be starting to reorganize data. So it'll be starting to take medical images and say something's a liver or a spleen and mapping data together. So that's a really simple but powerful use of AI that a physician on the front end can watch, monitor, and know 100% when it's acting in a crazy way. So these are powerful algorithms, but are also very brittle, and they'll do crazy stuff. So you need the physician in the front end watching it. So we need to start with really, really simple algorithms. And we're seeing people experiment with things that I think are too complex. So we start simple, make sure that those simple algorithms work very well, and make sure that we're hitting, low-hanging fruit. We hit major pain points as quickly as possible with the most simple uses of the tools. And then over time, these are going to be very sophisticated digital health platforms, and it just has to be, developed, very responsibly and very slowly. But, there's no question that we can build this new technology. Absolutely no question. The technologists have absolutely no qualms about that. I think it's all the, secondary issues around the technology that I think are the most challenging.
Gotcha. That's a great point. Guys, what is decision intelligence? Why do you think it'll be so important for AI in healthcare? How is it differentiated from, say, decision augmentation? Morgan, you want to jump in on that first?
Yeah. So I'll explain that, and then I'd love to hear Tom's response after mine. I'll just explain it at a simple level. So back to Google Maps, right? So what Kabizmi is doing is similar to what Terra Recon did, which became Google Maps, right? Back in the 90s, they started to put all the data about single locations on the globe into, organized by location, and that became Google Maps. What Kabizmi's doing is taking all your data, everything about your thumb gets mapped to your thumb, all the clinical data, medical imaging, et cetera, But the game changer here is that all of a sudden today, if I have a subjective diagnosis, I have to walk over to the pathology department or go into a separate system, look at a report and try to figure out whether I was right or not. In these new powerful cloud systems, right, all of a sudden we can map and organize patient data holistically in these powerful new ways, and we can map patient care outcomes. Okay, that's a huge. So back to Google Maps, what this means is that we can do something called decision intelligence, which is route optimization in Google Maps, right? So you put in an outcome and you get 3 different decision pathways with metrics, right? And you can choose the best decision pathway. So we're going to apply that with these new cloud systems to healthcare, and that is a game changer. And not only is it a game changer because we can continuously monitor and make sure that we're using these AI tools in a way that's making patient care outcomes better, but it's also, in my opinion, an extremely important safety valve, right? Because we have these new autonomous systems. And back to your question, how are we going to implement this technology and what's the pathway? To me, decision intelligence is critical to the pathway, because as we're adding these autonomous systems, we're going to be always monitoring the outcomes and make sure that they're safe and not doing crazy stuff, but really directed and doing what we want.
Let me take it in a little different path to streamline this just a bit. So whatever term you want to give it, when we say AI, and I think of clinicians and the process of what they do and manage, think of augmented intelligence. And I bring this down to, we've got some huge challenges ahead of us that are here today around things like a huge problem with workforce burnout, workforce crisis among doctors, nurses, and others. We also have a tremendous shortage of those people when you look ahead at what's going to happen to the care needs in the next decade. So bring all that together and let's look at AI. So when it comes to things like physician burnout, one study shows that up to 1/3 of all activities done by physicians could be automated with AI. These are not the high-level things. These are the highly repetitive, low-value things that are chewing up so much of their time. A study by Stanford shows that most physicians in America spend more time in the EMR than they do actually seeing patients. So imagine being able to make that change using AI and have a greater focus on what they got trained to do. I know many physicians who feel like they did not go to medical school to become data entry clerks. So our ability to do what a colleague of mine calls keyboard liberation for physicians would be huge. The second thing AI is there to address to help with the burnout issue is the whole thing of cognitive overload, where a physician in 1950 would go their entire practice before medical knowledge doubled. Today, medical knowledge is doubling roughly every 72 days. So how does that possibly work when it comes to the best physician coming out of medical school, knowing there's twice as much information in a matter of months? AI has the ability to take all of that, make it better, bring those things in control, and again, bringing it in behind to augment the skills and qualities that are unique to humans as physicians.
I think that was a wonderful description. And I think part of the message that we're trying to get across is, unlike a lot of competitors who are adding to complexity for the physicians, right? Old paradigms, incremental small things, is that we need technology that actually reduces complexity, right? So, to use Kabismi and what we're building as an example, once we map everything about your thumb to your thumb and anatomically, then we can use the technology to tell us, for example, what areas of the body are normal. That is a wonderful use and safe use of the technology where it can be very powerful. And when we have that today, if I look at a normal brain MR, I'm spending, tons of time just going through 500 images, clinical data. It's in a massive amount of data. Imagine instead opening a tool, having a 3D view of the patient's body and being able to skip 90% of what we're doing today. So that's the difference between, an incremental value with the AI versus a fundamental redesign where the value add is a huge leap forward. And to solve the huge crisis that we face, we need the big, huge forward iPhone moment leaps forward for healthcare.
Agreed 100%. And on that note, I think we're out of time, but we'd love to have you guys back to talk about more topics. Like I'd love to go deeper on the guardrails, for instance, and regulation, and we'll have to save that for another episode. But thank you so much for illuminating a partial view of the future for myself and for our viewers. And I'd like to turn it back over to Anthony with our final words here. Anthony.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tien. And thank you so much, Moira and Tom, for joining us today. This was such an insightful program today, and one that, as I said at the beginning, is so important to the future of health and medicine around the world, and such a powerful new technology, and so much, like you said, we're going to have to look at in terms of how it's actually used and implemented to have the impacts that you described today. So thank you for your leadership, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. It was great.